Yeah, I'd like to thank all the members for serving on the treatment subcommittee and pulling together today's event. Thank you as well for the esteemed panelists for their participation. Republicans have a tremendous opportunity to offer a positive and clear vision for the future of America's health care. Americans deserve better than one-size-fits-all government-run health care that doesn't strive to keep people healthy, but only pays to take care of people when they're sick. Just this month, CMS stepped into unilaterally overruled the FDA, eliminating access to a whole class of novel Alzheimer's treatments. Alzheimer's affect roughly 6 million Americans. I represent 240,000 seniors. This Alzheimer's drug could have a tremendous impact on many of our lives and lives of their families and caregivers. Arbitrarily restricting access to FDA-approved drugs will be devastating. This kind of overreach is exactly what Republicans plan to combat. Our constituents should not be denied access to cures and treatments. The Healthy Future Task Force is focused on developing policies that will offer more choices, lower cost, peace of mind, and hope by investing in developing new cures for life-threatening diseases that destroy families. Thanks again to Leader McCarthy, my co-chair Brett, and the rest of the treatment subcommittee for putting on today's event to help us plan for a healthier American future. Brett.
Thank you. Thanks, Vern. First, I want to thank everyone for being here, and I think it's very fitting that we're here today to present some of our Republican ideas for promoting greater innovation, more competition in the healthcare ecosystem, and ensuring patients have access to breakthrough therapies. While we are doing this, Biden's top healthcare official, Javier Becerra, just completed his second round of budget hearings with the Energy and Commerce Health Subcommittee, as well as the Ways and Means Health Subcommittee. The Biden HHS has completely lost its way and is no longer focusing on the core competencies that a $1 trillion healthcare agency should be focusing on doing. The budget calls for increased funding for combating the health impacts of climate change and even mentions climate change more than it does fentanyl in the 174-page budget brief. We need to get back to basics and focus on lowering costs through innovation and choice. We're here today to talk about how Republicans will promote policies and ideas designed to bring more cures to the market. We're here today to talk about how we're going to make sure patients can make the best possible healthcare decisions in consultation with their doctors and not be restricted to FDA-approved therapies by Washington, D.C. bureaucrats, especially when it comes to helping patients with limited treatment options access newly approved FDA therapies to treat diseases like Alzheimer's disease. We're only fighting to deliver lower costs. We're not only fighting to deliver lower costs, but we are also fighting to unleash innovation to deliver cures for these diseases. I thank Dr. Winstrup, Dr. Joyce, and Representative Westerman for their great work on the treatment subcommittee. I look forward to hearing their discussions today, and I will pass it to Chair of the subcommittee, Dr. Winstrup.
Well, thank you very much, and I want to thank Leader McCarthy for putting this task force together, and in particular the Healthy Futures Task Force, and for Representative Buchanan, Representative Guthrie, thank you for your leadership through this process. And I'm pleased to have had the opportunity through this process to work with Representative Westerman and Dr. Joyce as well. And I think we've come pretty far with all this. We've held roundtables. We've been out talking to stakeholders and researchers and talking to doctors. We've put out requests for information. One of the things that we're trying to do through this is pretty much is a general theme, the opposite of what Democrats and Build Back Better are trying to do, where they see a one-size-fits-all approach to medicine. And we know that medicine and healthcare in general is very personal. I can remember with our doctors caucus here in the Republican side, it's about 6 years ago under the Obama administration, we had someone from CMS coming in to talk to us so we could ask them questions, and it was nice that they came. But one of the things that the representative said is, all the things that we're starting to implement are really starting to work. And we all kind of looked at each other as doctors who have come from private practice, and I know Dr. Joyce will appreciate this. And I just looked at her and I said, do you know why we're here? Why we're serving in Congress now? On behalf of patients, because you've taken the joy out of taking care of patients with all the things that you say are implementing and doing so well. So we bring this experience to the table and hearing from so many people. So this task force really come together with three major goals. Lower the drug costs for Americans. Unleash new innovative medicines, devices, diagnostics to treat and cure diseases. That's the bottom line. And promote American-made medicines. You know, so our goal, lower drug costs. Well, H.R. 19 is a Republican bill, but it's really full of bipartisan measures that have developed over time. There's about 36 measures in there. And some of the things that are in H.R. 19 would lower drug costs without sacrificing innovation. It would do an out-of-pocket cap for seniors. Site-neutral drug payments. Drug payments for things like in-office IV therapies, et cetera. If it's site neutral, once it becomes part of a hospital, the price goes up. Price goes up for everyone. And we want to make sure that we can, as soon as possible, develop quality generic medications so that there's good competition out there. At the same time, protect patents of new innovations, because when we don't do that, then we lose those innovations. So that leads to the next goal, which is to unleash innovation. And the Biden administration stands in the way of a lot of these things. And a recent example is the FDA-approved Alzheimer's drug, which has its restricted windows. And whenever there's a new drug, they're always going to get better in the future. That's what we always see in medicine. But you get this FDA-approved medication, which could save so much money and obviously lead to an improved quality of life for people. And CMS decided that they're not going to cover it. Well, that makes it extremely difficult. And then also Biden pulled back the Trump-era policy to give seniors immediate access to new innovative devices approved by FDA's gold standards called the MCIT. And the Biden administration has put that on hold. And we're also seeking coverage for things like multi-cancer early detection diagnostics. What we're really trying to do across the board is improve people's health span. We always talk about lifespan, and we can go into detail about that, but really, how do we keep people healthier longer? I always use a reference, none of us are getting out of here alive, but let's live our lives, and let's live them well, and let's live them healthier. And the more we can do that, I think the better off we're going to be served. So another thing that concerns me is this quality adjusted life years that Democrats are talking about, which puts a value on everyone's life. And I think that's an extremely dangerous thing to do. Today, introduced a bill with Kathy McMorris Rogers and Jim Banks to ban what they call QALYs, Q-A-L-Y', if you will, from coverage determinations. It should not be part of that. And then lastly, promote American-made medications. If you'd have told me when I was serving in Iraq as a surgeon that my protective equipment and my pharmaceuticals relied on an adversary, in particular China, I think, how did we get here? Well, we're starting to try and investigate all that and see where things come from, and we've got to do what we can to bring things back to the United States of America. As far as companies go, since the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, there's been no inversions. People have not left the United States. Some have come here. We got to continue to go in that direction, and I believe we can do it through tax incentives for domestic manufacturing. So I'll leave it at that, and I want to give my cohorts on this committee an opportunity to speak. And if we'll start with Dr. Joyce. Thanks, Dr. Joyce.
Well, thank you, Dr. Wenstrup, and thanks both Congressman Guthrie and Congressman Buchanan and Congressman Wenstrup for being part of the panel here today. When I first found out that I was going to have the opportunity to serve on the Healthy Future Task Force, I thought of one of my patients, Charlie. 10 years ago, I diagnosed melanoma on Charlie's right thigh. And at that time, I did an excision, did an evaluation, and there was no evidence of any disease anywhere else. That was a good prognosis, except for 2 years later, Charlie presented with metastatic disease in internal organs. So at that time, we had only one treatment that was really advocated for, and that was interferon. So he underwent the therapy with interferon, and he completed that. but unfortunately it was unsuccessful. And at the advent of the new immunotherapies, Charlie was introduced to one of those, and he was treated with one of the new immunotherapies. And it went along well, except the tumor continued to progress. So a second immunotherapy, which was not originally available when he was diagnosed, was introduced. And today, Charlie is tumor-free. There is no evidence of metastatic melanoma with Charlie. That innovation, that is what we as Americans reach for, and that's what we work for on the Healthy Task Force. We look for individualized, innovative, and personal health care. That's what America wants. That's what our patients, that's what our constituents want. And that's what we've been able to advocate for. Research, talk to the different constituents, talk to the member organizations that have given us the input as we outline a plan moving forward. So I called Charlie. I told him I was going to talk about him today to this group. I said, Charlie, if you didn't have those two different therapies, where would you be today? He said, I'd be dead. I would not be alive if I didn't have these new innovative therapies. And I think that's an important message that we as Republicans, as we outline a plan moving forward, that individualized, that personal, that innovative therapies are the cornerstone of American healthcare. And we have to continue to advocate for that. We have to be able to be part of that. With the treatment subcommittee, we've had the chance to find solutions that work for patients and work for doctors. Medical innovation is what allows us to share these success stories like Charlie's. We need to ensure that government regulations never get in the way of finding the cures that our constituents are looking for. That will mean passing H.R. 19, the Lower Cost, More Cures Act. It will mean expanding access to new and innovative drugs for Medicare patients and incentivizing domestic medical manufacturing to prepare those new therapies and therapeutics that will help save lives. It's a simple goal, but American medicine needs to be unleashed to continue that innovation that helps all of our constituents. I thank each and every one of you for being here today for this innovative and concise conversation. We on the Healthy Future Task Force are dedicated that when we take those next steps, that innovation, personalized, individual healthcare are front and foremost as we move forward. And now I turn it over to my colleague, Representative Bruce Westerman.
Well, thank you, John, and thank you to our co-chairs of the Healthcare Task Force. And it's been an honor to work on this subcommittee with two medical doctors. I'm not a medical doctor. I got a lot of questions. Why do you want to be on the healthcare subcommittee, or on the healthcare task force and on the treatment subcommittee? And the simple reason is because healthcare affects all of us. Healthcare affects the budget and the deficit that this country is running. It's great to have my former colleague Eric Paulson here, and Sue, welcome, and to everyone else. John was talking about his patient, and I think back to my oldest son, who's now 26. When he was 1 month old, he had a respiratory disease. I'm an engineer, I'm a forester, hadn't paid a whole lot of attention to health care. I find myself in the pediatric ward, and my son's not getting better, and the doctor says, well, we have this experimental drug. I think that's how she described it. And she said, your insurance doesn't cover it. It's $5,000 a dose, and he needs 5 doses of it. Do you want to give it to him? Well, what's any parent? She could have said it's $500,000 a dose. Do you want to give it to him? And the answer would have been yes. I'll figure out how to pay for it down the road. I'm grateful that there were people that were inventing drugs like this that I'm sure is probably readily available now, that just a short time before my son went into the hospital, it wasn't available. And I'm thankful that there were innovators out there looking for cures that made a difference in my family's life. And there's a lot of families like that, and a lot of people that have been affected. So, as we look at the job of this task force and of this subcommittee on the task force and the roles that we play, I got baptized by fire on healthcare when I went into the state legislature when the Affordable Care Act was being implemented, and I learned more about healthcare through that experience, healthcare policy, I will say. And then, you know, like I said, I came here and I started out on the budget committee, and I realized that, you know, one of the biggest drivers in the debt is what's happening with government-funded healthcare. In FreeOp's 2021 World Index of Healthcare Innovation, the U.S. ranked 29th out of 31 high-income countries on the fiscal sustainability of its healthcare system. We're ahead of only France and Japan. In 2019, the healthcare spending accounted for 17.7% of the GDP and accounts for roughly half of federal spending when you take into account programs such as Medicare, Medicaid, CHIP, Social Security checks that are spent on healthcare costs, tax credits, and the spending that goes toward the interest portion of the national debt. So if we want to fix our debt problem, we have to fix the healthcare issue. And right now, we're going in the wrong direction on making healthcare more fiscally good, improving that, and we cannot sacrifice the quality of care that people expect in the innovation. I think when we start doing that, we're actually going the wrong direction, and we will see the cost of healthcare go even higher. And that's why plans like Senator Warren and Senator Sanders' Medicare for All, that's seeking to control cost and increase coverage even more, I think that's just going to originate or develop into a single payer system that's going to drive down quality and drive up cost, which are the things that we definitely don't need. And I think that's the path that we're on right now. Speaker Pelosi's H.R. 3 tries to do the job by negotiating with payments. And we see things like trying to cap cost on the insulin that was just a bill that passed out of the House. And we ignore things like PBMs. So we've got to get to the root problems and make sure that we're promoting innovation, that we're promoting fiscal accountability. And I think what we've produced out of this subcommittee is going to roll into the big task force, and we're going to have a great healthcare plan that addresses all of those issues. How do we lower drug costs for Americans? How do we unleash American innovation on new drugs, on new devices, and on diagnosis and on the way that treatments are delivered? And as Dr. Winstrup said, you know, American-made medicines and medical equipment. I was shocked to learn when the pandemic started, and I had people in my district wanting to produce face masks, and the fabric that goes into an N95 face mask is made by an American company, but was all in a warehouse in China. And we had the people with the equipment to make it, but we couldn't get the basic fabric to go into it. So these are the kind of issues we need to be addressing, and I'm just glad to be the outsider, the non-doctor on the task force. But to defend engineers, we're problem solvers, so we'll take the expert advice from my colleagues and solve a problem.
We'll take that. Listen, thank you. Good introductions, appreciate it. But I want to thank our guests for being here and for joining us. And so I'd like to turn it over to Ms. Peshin, who serves as President and CEO at the Alliance for Aging Research, the leading national nonprofit organization dedicated to improving healthy aging, I've somewhat referenced in my opening remarks. Yeah. I'll let you jump in and tell us more about the work of your organization and how your proposals will impact seniors positively.
Absolutely, and thank you all so much for inviting me here today, and thank you for the work that you are all doing to lower out-of-pocket costs for Medicare beneficiaries while really putting an emphasis on preserving innovation and access to treatment. The issue of out-of-pocket costs for older adults in the Medicare program is really a critical focus of our work. And now's the time to ensure that the program continues to meet the needs of older adults and people with disabilities. In 2019, my organization, the Alliance, started Project Loop, which stands for Lower Out-of-Pocket Costs in Medicare Part D Now. And it's an ad hoc coalition of more than 130 organizations. And we have two priorities, which you are all trying to address and talking about here today. The first is creation of an annual out-of-pocket cap. Medicare beneficiaries are the only group of insured people in the United States not protected by an annual out-of-pocket cap. A survey by a National Patient Assistance Foundation reported that 3/4 of seniors on Medicare say they can't afford to pay over $200 for their prescription drugs each month. A cap will help prevent trade-offs between paying for medicines or paying for groceries. Our second priority is to implement a smoothing mechanism. Many beneficiaries leave prescriptions unfilled when faced with a $500 or even $1,000 tab for a single visit to the pharmacy counter. Congress should allow all Medicare beneficiaries to smooth costs evenly over the benefit year without an arbitrary threshold to qualify. We also applaud all of you on the Healthy Future Task Force opposition to CMS's non-coverage decision for the entire class of new Alzheimer's treatments, not just one drug, but the entire class of monoclonal antibody therapies that target Alzheimer's. The impact of this decision is going to be particularly harsh on people of color, people who live in rural communities, people with Down syndrome, and the poorest of the poor, full benefit, dually eligible beneficiaries. CMS is not a science agency like the FDA. They are a payer. CMS should not be allowed to contradict FDA's statutory authority to ensure the safety and efficacy of medical products in support of its public health mission. CMS claims their decision is just about Alzheimer's, but that's simply not true. This sets a precedent to further undermine the FDA's authority. The FDA launched its accelerated approval program 30 years ago. The accelerated approval program allows for expedited approval of drugs for disease states where patients and physicians have run out of or lack entirely options to treat fatal illnesses. Doug Holtz-Eakin, former director of the CBO, found that, quote, limiting coverage for accelerated approval drugs would have a devastating impact on patients benefiting from these treatments while having a de minimis impact on spending. In short, you won't get a lot of juice for the squeeze here. Congress needs to preserve and strengthen the FDA's accelerated approval program. We also support the work being done to ban public and private payers from using the quality-adjusted life year. Why is a health economics measure a problem? Because it places a lower value on those who have less years to live in front of them and on those in less than perfect health. Why should payers be allowed to determine you're not worth covering because you're too old, too sick, have a disability, or won't likely live as long due to other negative social factors in your environment? Isn't the point of paying into insurance our whole lives that it should cover treatment for you when you need it? The National Council on Disability has repeatedly warned against the use of QALYs in healthcare decision-making because it undermines major U.S. civil disability and civil rights laws, including the Rehabilitation Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act. Unfortunately, there are payers, including private insurers, the Veterans Administration, and state Medicaid agencies that are increasingly utilizing quality-based cost-effectiveness analyses from the Institute for Clinical and Economic Review, also known as ICER, to ration access for FDA-approved treatments. And it's time for these harmful practices to stop and for us to place patients first. It's time to ban the use of QALYs in healthcare decision-making, and I appreciate that you're trying to do that, so thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sue. Appreciate that. Next, it's my honor to introduce my friend, former Representative Eric Paulson, who served with me on Ways and Means Committee, one of the more thoughtful members on the Ways and Means Committee. And today he's here speaking in his new capacity as the chairman of the Institute for Gene Therapy. The Institute for Gene Therapy brings together experts across the healthcare system to advocate for a modernized policy framework that encourages transformative innovations, promotes patient access, and codifies transparent reimbursement practices. Representative Paulson, it's good to see you back, and I'll let you take it from there.
Thank you very much, and thank you, members, for inviting me to join you with Sue today. I look forward to this important discussion. As you mentioned, I'm Eric Paulson. I served in Congress from 2009 to 2019 in the 3rd District of Minnesota, but today I am honored now to serve as the chair of the Institute for Gene Therapies. And as you mentioned, as IGT as it's referenced, we launched in February of 2020, and we advocate for modernized policies to help patients access transformative gene therapies. Gene therapies are no doubt changing the way that we treat diseases. They target the cause of the disease directly at the DNA level, rather than mitigating the symptoms to create a long-lasting change in the body. The first approved gene therapies are already changing the way conditions such as MSA and inherited blindness are treated. There are many more in development, giving rare disease patients hope where before they had none. These treatments will not only help patients thrive, but gene therapies will also help deliver value to our healthcare system. As they can often be one-time treatments with benefits that last a lifetime, gene therapies help eliminate many years of expensive ongoing care. Chronic disease, as some of our physicians know, affects 50% of our population, and its care consumes 85% of our healthcare costs. So as we work to identify meaningful healthcare cost policy solutions, we should consider how gene therapies will help lower costs over time. And because gene therapies are fundamentally different from existing treatment options, there are many new challenges in bringing these therapies to patients. For example, given the very unique nature of genetic diseases and the significant unmet need, the FDA's accelerated approval pathway can be critical to ensuring that we have timely access for patients once that these treatments have been proven to be safe and effective. It's so important to protect and enhance the accelerated approval pathway. We must also ensure that we have the right tools for identifying these genetic disorders early. Timely access to an accurate diagnosis through newborn screening is important. And because of the unique nature of gene therapies, novel reimbursement pathways must be considered to help ensure that our healthcare system can accommodate these new innovative treatments. Last year, CMS took an important step forward. It issued further guidance to establish and implement the infrastructure needed for novel payment mechanisms, which are often referred to as value-based purchasing or VBP arrangements. VBPs will ensure reimbursement is based on the value that these treatments deliver to patients, and then our healthcare system can benefit over time. Earlier this month, Representative Schrader, Guthrie, and Mullen introduced the Medicaid VBPs for Patient Act, or the MVP Act, which builds on the work of CMS to make sure that there are very clear pathways for VBP arrangements. So again, I just want to thank the task force and your members for having me here today. The plan I think you have put forward addresses important issues that will make a difference in the lives of patients, ranging from VBPs to accelerating treatments to ensuring early diagnosis of cancer through new innovative tools like blood tests.
Thank you very much, Eric. I appreciate that. Finally, I'd like to introduce Crystal Davis to share her story. She is with us, coming to us from Texas, actually, where she founded the Texas Rare Alliance. Ms. Davis's son is a rare disease patient living with spinal muscular atrophy. Ms. Davis is an author, coach, and a patient advocate. And Ms. Davis, I'll turn to you to tell us more about your family, your work as a patient advocate, and what policies we're unveiling today might mean for you.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here today and represent the patient community. At Texas Rare Alliance, we work to improve access and health outcomes for rare disease patients through education and advocacy. And every day we do that by removing barriers to access and replacing those barriers to access with bridges to access. And that includes access to innovative treatments and also access to those treatments in what matters most to patients, and that's how much they pay for those treatments at the pharmacy counter or on their hospital bills. So I'm honored to be here as a rare disease parent, caregiver, and patient advocate to share my perspective and represent the 1 in 10 Americans, more than 30 million, affected by more than 8,000 rare diseases. It's crucial we continue to develop innovative disease-modifying treatments for rare conditions with unmet needs like Huntington's disease, ALS, and MS, just as it is for common conditions like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and diabetes. These conditions exact a huge toll on our healthcare system, our budget, and more importantly, patient lives. At the current pace, it will take thousands of years to secure treatments for all rare diseases. Meanwhile, a third of children with a rare disease will not survive to their 5th birthday. Research for rare diseases can and must move with the same relentless urgency as COVID-19 research. And I do know the devastation, frustration, and fear of not being able to access a life-saving treatment. When doctors diagnosed Hunter with SMA back in 2011, they told us there was no treatment. There was no hope, and that really all we could do was take Hunter home and enjoy what time we had left with him. Well, as you likely know, we couldn't afford to listen to them. The stakes were too high. With the help of a researcher, we manufactured a compound in the US and took it to Mexico for a trial. And 8 weeks after his diagnosis, Hunter was the first SMA patient to receive a life-saving treatment. Hunter is now 10 years old. You may hear him in the background because I have to listen to him on his monitor because I'm home alone with him today. The average patient can't and shouldn't have to flee to another country to access a life-saving treatment. We can and must do better. Controls in H.R. 3 and Build Back Better Act would decimate the continued development of innovative treatments in the rare disease community. Patients in the reference countries from H.R. 3 have much worse access to innovative treatments than patients in the U.S. H.R. 3 is even worse because it turns to countries that utilize quality metrics in developing reimbursement and access to innovative treatments. Quality metrics are discriminatory and arbitrary metrics that devalue the lives of chronically ill, disabled, and elderly patients, including rare disease patients like Hunter. ICER valued SMA treatments and scored SMA patients like Hunter at a 0.2, determining the ASO treatment was not cost effective. And the way the quality works is there's a continuum. 0 is death and 1 is a year of perfect health. And Hunter's quality is 0.2. And what that means is it devalues his life 80% of our other children who are in perfect health. And it gets much worse because when you turn to ALS patients, they have a negative quality of negative 0.05, a negative 0.05. And that means they view having ALS worse than being dead. And you may recall last year, we enacted the Act for ALS. So we're really doubling down on advancing ALS research. And if ALS patients can't access those innovative treatments upon FDA approval, then it's all for naught. So we need to make sure that access matches innovation and that innovation continues. I applaud the Republican leadership for its stance against QALYs and ask every other member of Congress to join in to protect patients from QALYs. President Biden stated he opposed the utilization of QALYs early in his campaign, as have many others. Doctors tell us there's no hope, but we have more than hope. We have unconditional love for our children and we refuse to give up on them. We cannot afford to stop opposing H.R. 3. We refuse to save our children only to have a system adopt QALYs that give up on them. We must responsibly reduce drug pricing by considering the clinical cost and indirect cost to families as they relate to drug pricing, improving access to generics and biosimilars, innovating the FDA process to make it less expensive to conduct drug discovery and clinical trials, provide PBM oversight and reform, reduce patient out-of-pocket expenses for medications, and finally, make sure that medications are made in the US. So when we encounter other situations like we did with the pandemic, we're not fearing if we're going to have a stable supply chain. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. You knocked it out of the park, I have to say. And as Mr. Guthrie here just said, there's nothing like a mom and the love of a mom to go to work and advocate and try and bring out the best that we have to offer and to do it smartly. And I really appreciate your conversation about HR 3 because it would totally stymie innovation in new medications. And if anything, and we want the United States to be the hub of innovation, right? We want this to be the place. And that is something that if there's any innovation left at all, it's probably not going to be in the United States because it would just be so crushing. So really keep advocating. We appreciate it. So we're going to take some time right now and ask some questions and go around the horn here a little bit. And I'll start with Representative Paulson. We are on the forefront of incredible medical innovation. I mean, throughout my career and practice, you know, I saw things that I had to treat surgically. A good example is patients with rheumatoid arthritis have to do reconstructive surgery. They need it on their hands, their feet, and those procedures basically went away. It went away with the biologics. The joints weren't being destroyed, and I know Dr. Joyce knows that very well in his practice as well. And I used to lecture on the procedures that I do, and I tell you. That lecture's so old now, I realized seeing it in the basement that it's in a carousel. So you have some idea how the innovations just keep coming. So, Mr. Paulson, if you would, can you tell us more about how these value-based arrangements would work, what the barriers are, and how reforms can help patient access to these cures of the future?
Well, first I should mention you are exactly right about innovation. These are really exciting times, and our laws and our healthcare system have to be designed to keep up with the science, is the bottom line. So with gene therapies, as you mentioned, you know, patients can get the results long-term from just one treatment potentially. And so the value that gene therapies can deliver to patients is really incredible, but more importantly, we should also be looking at how it can deliver significant value for the healthcare system as a whole by saving healthcare dollars. And since we'd be saving significant time and money with one-time treatments, rather than extending treatments for chronic care over a long period of time, we have to start thinking differently about the payment models, right? And how payments would actually occur for these transformative therapies. So I think the really great value, or the thing to talk about with value-based purchasing agreements, or VBPs, is that they can look very differently, or they can be designed very flexibly, so there's not a one-size-fits-all approach. So here's an example. You could have a VBP arrangement that could involve meeting certain clinical outcomes, say after 1 year, 3 years, or 5 years for treatment. But if you failed to achieve certain outcomes, you could then require the manufacturer to give refunds back to the payer, for instance. Or maybe a VBP arrangement could provide for installment payments over a period of time so the payer can help spread the cost out for those treatments over multiple years. I think in the end, VBPs can and they will evolve over time. And if given flexibility now as policy leaders, as you develop these innovative agreements between manufacturers and payers, perhaps between regions and different states, for instance, or large employers pooling their resources and data together, it can help ensure how we pay for innovative treatments will allow for continued innovation in the future in the treatment themselves.
Yeah, that goes to a point that we talk about here a lot, which would be like dynamic scoring of things. You know, good example is a cure for hepatitis C, which we never had until a few years ago. And people say, well, that's pretty costly. Yeah, there's some cost to it, no doubt about it. But what you're saving on the other end is tremendous. You cure this disease that otherwise requires multiple hospitalizations, a lot of palliative care, maybe a transplant, all of these things that cost way more than the cost of the drug. And we have to be thinking about that as we go to, especially towards cures. So these innovations need to be brought out there because there really is a savings. And so here, maybe we shouldn't be looking necessarily at a 10-year window of savings, but a 20-year window of savings, and it's even greater. Dr. Joyce.
Representative Paulson, I think that the innovation that gene therapies bring to the table, whether those studies are extended to other, and I'm going to give you the opportunity, if you would kindly, let's talk about diseases that have incredible financial impact, and yet gene therapies, insulin-dependent diabetics, which there have been loci found on genes, autism, which has recently been identified to have different genetic. So we look, and to my colleague, Dr. Wenstrup's point, we look at short term, but long-term costs have to be addressed. And if we stifle that innovation with HR 3, which, and I really have to comment, Ms. Davis, your story, the passion that you told us about, if we stifle that, if we don't allow access and innovation to be concurrent, then we're not going to allow these cures to occur. But can you talk about future and talk about where gene therapies, we know what can be achieved, we understand that there's cost and how we value that cost. But can you look into the horizon for us and tell us what's out there?
Well, there's no doubt this is the new frontier of medicine. And I think Crystal has talked a little bit about the experience with her son, for instance. But if you think of some larger disease populations that I think are coming on the horizon for where the FDA is going to be reviewing in clinical trials is and will be continued, it's diseases like hemophilia or sickle cell anemia, for instance. And these are larger populations, so there's an opportunity for incredible healthcare dollar savings from treatment, avoiding all these chronic treatments year after year after year, with potentially long-time cures or permanent cures, right, potentially, with the FDA going through that gold standard process, keeping the accelerated approval process in place, for instance. So those are a couple of the disease states, and there's many, many more patients of rare diseases, obviously, that would have no hope were it not for this new frontier of medicine targeting individual diseases, where there's now platforms being developed to make sure that's delivered.
Thank you.
If I can ask you, Sue, when we see these bills that Democrats are coming forward with that really stymie innovation, which make it so incredibly difficult, they may sound good. They might have a nice little title to their bill, but it ends up really having deleterious effects. Can you talk about some of those things and the effects and those policies that they have out there and what that would mean for seniors?
Sure. I mean, Crystal touched on some of this, but we share her sentiment around any types of policies like international reference pricing that would basically, adopt prices from other countries. I think that it's sort of like almost like a shiny object when we look at European countries and healthcare in European countries, like everyone is covered and it's so great. But the times that people have to wait to get access to healthcare, the access for new types of therapies, tends to be months to years longer than here in the United States. I was just thinking as Eric Paulson was speaking about how in the United States, you have wings of hospitals named after dignitaries from other countries, right? People come to the United States because we offer access and we offer innovative therapies. They don't go to European countries because they can't get it there. And aside from that, just like what Crystal said, we would be importing use of quality-based cost effectiveness. And we don't have, we have a very different healthcare system than other countries in Europe do. And we don't have to worry about sort of rationing of healthcare. And that's what qualies do, is they set up a policy where you're rationing and you're sort of picking and choosing. So who are you leaving out? You're leaving out the sickest, the people with disabilities, the old. And that's what happens in other countries. It's more talking about, convalescent care and all of that, rather than what do the patients actually want, what do families want. And to Crystal's point, people are just devalued in those types of settings. So international reference pricing, not a good idea here in the United States.
Would you put an exclamation point, Sue, because I think you made an excellent point when you talked about CMS pushing aside the monoclonal antibodies that address the amyloid deposition, which has been identified as one of the precursors in Alzheimer's disease. So I'll speak to my district. I am in South Central Pennsylvania, from Gettysburg to the Flight 93 Memorial. It is a rural district, and yet my constituents are going to be excluded because they have to enter into phase 3, they have to enter into trials, they have to enter into studies to be included in that. Well, if you are eligible, if you can afford, if you can get into that program, but then travel 2 hours, 3 hours to Philadelphia or Pittsburgh, that's going to exclude. And I'll talk about a specific patient that I'm aware of as a constituent. There's someone who has Down syndrome, which we know is a predisposition to develop Alzheimer's disease. Those are excluded. So CMS is excluding a wide population by this action. Can you address that? Because I think you touched on it briefly, and it's important because as we talk about innovation and how important that is, CMS is stifling the access.
Okay, and I have to mention that I grew up in Pittsburgh, so. So we have to talk afterwards. But you're absolutely right. I mean, we led an Alzheimer's disease policy task force effort around this, where we had 20 organizations that were a part of it, a number of Alzheimer's patient and family caregiver groups, as well as minority health groups. And we also connected very closely with the Down syndrome community. All of the national Down syndrome organizations were opposed to CMS's coverage decision because of the reasons that you brought up, is that they would have been left out. And it's, very disturbing that these types of coverage with evidence development, even though evidence development is in the name, it's not really about collecting evidence, it's about restricting, access so that the idea is lower costs in Medicare, but it's cherry picking. Why is it Alzheimer's, and it's not fair to that community. So you have this setup where they set these coverage requirements where you have to have a multidisciplinary team and all these other things around it, where they can only occur in large, big city academic hospitals. And so rural populations are left out. A lot of minority communities are left out. They're very complicated. And they even, they try to make it sound like, oh, we're just collecting information for a patient registry. These create whole new sort of systems of business for the groups that run these registries, and they take long periods of time for patients. So if you have a full-time job and you can't afford to spend all that time, and it's just very bureaucratic. It creates a lot of money for a lot of other groups, and patients are the ones that are sort of left out of the whole equation.
That the CMS is discriminatory in this case?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And they did make a point to actually bring out the equity issue, which we praised them for. But at the same time, when they sort of set up this dynamic with the draft decision and then the final decision, and Alzheimer's disease has a disproportionate impact on communities of color. It's about 2 times higher in African Americans and 1.5 times in Latinx communities. So, doing this in these types of communities, and there's a lot of people of color out in rural communities as well, it just is leaving them out of the equation. And we had National Minority Equality Forum with us, BOM and Gilead. There were a number of minority groups that partnered with us, and patients from those groups that were just, really hurt by this decision.
Thank you. You mentioned rural areas, rural and underserved areas, urban areas are a big focus of the overall Healthy Futures Task Force. Appreciate you bringing that up. Supply chain, big part of it. We would like to take some questions from the press that we have here, if we can tee that up.
I got one. I'm Peter with the Health Newspaper. Thanks for doing this. This is for Mr. Guthrie. I think this is for the whole future, not just this subcommittee. But on Obamacare, are you going to say, are you going to call for repealing and replacing Obamacare, or how do you kind of address that in this task force?
Well, what we're trying to focus on, of course, leadership is going to, in the end, as we work this together, but what we're focused on, if you're talking about, we want solutions. We want things that are going to work. We're talking about HR 19, which is bipartisan bills. We're talking about fixing the issue with Agilum, where they have CMS. I've had Democrat colleagues talk about that needs to be fixed. We're talking about value-based agreements. You just saw that Kurt Schrader and I, along with Mark Wayne Mullen, are on the bill. And so what we really want to focus on, we know over the next 2 years, Joe Biden is going to be president of the United States. And so if we want to get things done that are going to make a difference in people's lives, then we have to do things that fit our principles, fit our marketplace, that we can get, which HR 19 does, that we can get Democrat support so we can get it through the Senate and signed by the president. So we want successes for the American people. And we're going to only be able to do that if we can stay within our values, but work with colleagues that share our values on the other side of the aisle and get these things to the president. That's going to be our focus.
I was going to talk about priorities, but just laid that out very nicely. Megan Wilson, I'm with Politico, by the way. In terms of the at-home decision, I mean, would that be a legislative fix that you would be looking at, or how would you sort of address that?
We're looking at the right way to do that. We talked about it with, several people brought it to Secretary Becerra yesterday when he spoke to Energy and Commerce. I assume it came up in Ways and Means today. And so we want to work to see where we need to go with that. It is, so there's not a current legislative draft that I know of that I'm working, well, I know that I'm not working. I don't know if someone else is working on to move forward. But we're concerned about the precedent of FDA being the scientific body, as I don't know if it was Ms. Peshin or Dr. Winstrup said, FDA being the scientific body and CMS being the payer, and then CMS making decisions based on FDA approval, that they're substituting their view for that. So we got to figure out, I don't think they have the authority to do that anyway. And so what we want to try to sort through, if we can work through it, if not, I think there needs to be a legislative fix. But I don't know of a current legislative fix, and we want to try to address it the way they are, and we don't think CMS has that authority anyway.
Sure. And the FDA approval of that raised a bunch of questions about the accelerated approval process, which y'all talked a lot about here today. There's also been, at hearings, a lot of talk about, potentially tweaking accelerated approval. And so I'm just curious to hear your thoughts about, you talk about strengthening that process and sort of how you see addressing accelerated approval.
Well, if I may,
Yeah, go for it, yeah.
You take the example we just talked about with FDA and CDC, there has to be greater communication between, but you have these bodies, and they're in silos, but they need to be talking, through this process. And I think that was terribly missed in the decision we just saw there. So openness, transparency, communication across the board, you're accelerating, but you're explaining why. I look at things like Operation Warp Speed, right? So we were very much engaged, especially as medical professionals in conference and in Congress on what was going on. We could look at the trials. We were understanding what was taking place, what the technology was doing. This has to be interactive like that, and what our thought process is, and why FDA approved this drug, and et cetera. But say for the vaccine, as we're looking at that, we were out saying, oh, I understand what you're doing. In most trials for a new drug by FDA, there's usually 8,000 to 10,000 people in a trial. These trials had 40,000 to 50,000 people in them. That was an important thing for the American people to know, and for everyone to know as you're going through this process. So a little more openness and communication amongst the agencies would make a big difference, I think. Okay. Well, listen, I want to thank our guests, and I want to thank the press for being here as well, to listen in on what we have to say. I have to say, Ms. Davis, you did such an outstanding job of summarizing anything. We didn't have any questions of you because you answered them.
Yeah, we did.
So the things that I had down that I was maybe going to ask you, you already summed up. But everyone did a great job, I think, and thank you for your advocacy for all the right reasons on behalf of patients. And thanks for everyone who's joined us today.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks. Good job.
Thank you.